MotoGP doesn't need to fake a crash or rewrite a result to rig a championship. It just needs to steer the momentum. It started becoming obvious in 2006. Rossi was the sport's god. His legend had grown so big, MotoGP itself began to orbit around him. But that year, the grid wasn't playing along. Hayden, the American underdog, quietly put together a season built on consistency. Not flashy, not dominant, but always in the points. He was fast, but not fastest. Smart, but not tactical. Just there. Rossi, on the other hand, had suffered technical failures early in the year. Chain breaks, engine issues, front-end wobbles Yamaha couldn't explain. But as the season climaxed, Rossi was back. He won races, closed the gap. Final round, Valencia. It was all on the line. Hayden needed to finish ahead. Rossi needed to finish clean. And then, lap 5, Rossi crashed. Just like that, the season was decided. Hayden crossed the line in third and took the title. People said it was fair that Rossi choked, but years later, Yamaha insiders whispered another version. The front-end setup on Rossi's bike had been altered. It gave him more turn-in, less stability, something not tested at Valencia. The decision? Rushed, encouraged, internally backed, because the pressure to win wasn't just coming from within Yamaha, it was coming from the top. MotoGP was at a global crossroads. The US market was slipping, American viewership was fading. Hayden's title? That wasn't just about racing, it was marketing gold. The idea wasn't to make Rossi lose, the idea was to make Hayden's win possible. And when it worked, MotoGP learned something. You don't need to rig the race, you just need to shift the environment around it. Then came 2007. Casey Stoner, just 21 years old, signs with Ducati. Nobody expects what happens next. He doesn't just win, he destroys. 10 victories. Ducati's first title, and he does it on a bike no one else could tame. The Desmo Sedici was raw, brutal, unstable. Stoner, he turned it into a scalpel, but MotoGP wasn't thrilled. That Ducati was too fast. People began accusing them of electronics advantages, special traction control, throttle mapping that reacted before the rider did. The following season, Dorna introduces a new rule. 1 tire spec per rider per race weekend. No more switching compounds last minute. No more adjusting strategy. And just like that, Stoner's edge dulls. By 2009, the paddock pushes further. Spec ECUs become the future. Engine mapping restricted, traction algorithms standardized. It wasn't because of safety, it wasn't about fairness. It was a response to a rider that broke their logic. Stoner wasn't supposed to win like that, so they made sure it wouldn't happen again. Then came 2015, the year MotoGP stopped hiding. Rossi versus Lorenzo, Yamaha versus Yamaha. 2 riders in the same garage. But the war wasn't fought in leathers. It was fought with strategy. And then Marquez appeared. Marquez wasn't in the title fight. He was already out, mathematically. But in the last 3 races of the season, he rode like his only job was to make sure Rossi didn't win the title. At Phillip Island, he toys with Rossi lap after lap instead of chasing down Lorenzo. In Malaysia, he does the same, this time more aggressively. Rossi snaps. The leg comes out. Marquez falls. Race direction reacts immediately. Penalty, no delay, no hearing. Rossi starts from the back in Valencia. And in Valencia, Marquez doesn't attack Lorenzo. He doesn't pass. He doesn't even try. Lorenzo wins the race, wins the championship, in Spain on a Yamaha, while 2 Spanish riders, Lorenzo and Marquez, shake hands under a sky filled with confetti.
And the man who put MotoGP on the global map, Valentino Rossi, he's left out of the story he built. The fans called it rigged, MotoGP called it racing. But every rider in the paddock felt the chill, because when one rider's aggression gets ignored and another's reaction gets punished, that's not racing, that's narrative control. MotoGP needed a Spanish champion for a Spanish crowd. They couldn't risk Rossi winning with that much friction behind the scenes. And once again, they didn't break the rules, they just applied them selectively. And if you think that was the last time, you haven't been watching closely, because MotoGP didn't stop after 2015, they just learned to get quieter. Fabio Quartararo had everything Dorna wanted in 2021. Young, clean, global appeal, French, a Yamaha poster boy with enough Rossi DNA to be marketable, but none of the political baggage, and he delivered. Won clean, dominated on tracks that didn't favor his bike, beat the more powerful Ducati without hole-shot gadgets, ride height manipulation, or rocket starts. But behind closed doors, the grid was preparing to make sure it wouldn't happen again. Because Quartararo wasn't playing the MotoGP script. He wasn't dramatic, he wasn't political, he didn't sell headlines, he just won. And that's when the silence started. 2022 rolls in. Ducati upgrades their already superior machine. Top speed, untouchable. Acceleration, unmatched. Aero, like fighter jet panels duct taped to a missile. But Quartararo, still pushing, still carrying Yamaha on his back, still clawing podiums from underpowered machinery. And just as he begins to build momentum, the tires start to disappear. Not metaphorically, literally. Rear grip vanishes mid-race. Tire degradation increases when telemetry says it shouldn't. He begins to lose pace. Not from mistakes, but from invisible decay. Meanwhile, Bagnaia, who opened the season crashing, stumbling, fumbling the title, is suddenly perfect. Perfect grip, perfect launch, perfect pace, and people start asking questions. Tire compounds are rotated between teams every race weekend. The batches, not always identical, and by mid-season the whispers become murmurs. Why do Ducati riders always seem to find the grip window? Why does Fabio's degradation spike only after leading? MotoGP and Michelin say nothing. No data published, no breakdowns shown. Fabio at one point even says, "I don't understand this tire anymore," but Pecco, he understands everything. By the last 5 races, Bagnaia has the fastest machine, the longest traction life, and 6 Ducati allies across the grid, and those allies matter. Because when Enea Bastianini, a rising star on a satellite Ducati, gets close to Pecco in the closing laps of Aragon and Sepang, the racing stops being racing. No lunges, no last corner bravery, just respectful distance. Enea's body language is telling. You can see it, he could go for it, but he doesn't. Because everyone knows the unspoken rule. You don't beat the guy Ducati's protecting. After the race, reporters ask, "Team orders?" They deny it. But the cameras don't lie. It wasn't just Bastianini. Horsch Martin, Zarco, even Bezzecchi all seemed to lift subtly when Bagnaia was in the picture. They call it not risking it. But that's just code for don't ruin the script, and it worked. Pecco pulls off the greatest comeback in years. From 91 points behind to champion, MotoGP hails it as a fairy tale. But the fans? They feel the strings. Because Quartararo was left with nothing. No updates, no power, no tire confidence, no team orders, no factory support grid-wide. Just a sinking ship in the middle of a season the sport had already decided wasn't his. And that's how modern championships get rigged. Not with cheating, not with scandal, but with the slow erosion of support for the guy they don't want, while building a fortress around the one they do. Even in technical regulation, you see the favoritism. Ducati introduces front right height adjusters. Illegal? No, but clearly unfair. MotoGP debates, teams scream. MotoGP delays the ban. Why? Because they needed Ducati to keep winning. A rising Italian force was easier to sell than the narrative of Yamaha fights alone. Then there's the aerodynamic freeze loophole. In 2023, Ducati is allowed to run updated aero that clearly bends the rules on scope. More fins, tighter channels, better weight control. Aprilia tries the same, instant FIA pushback. Request denied, update locked. Again, same parts, different logos, different outcomes. It's not sabotage, it's subtle permission. A quiet green light when the right team makes the right move. And that's what made 2022 so hard to swallow. Because Quartararo didn't lose a title, he was isolated from it. And Bagnaia, he didn't just win, he was given the space to do it cleanly. When Pecco Bagnaia finally stood on the top step of the championship podium in 2022, the message MotoGP delivered was clear. The system works. The right rider won. And if you thought otherwise, you weren't paying attention. But fans were, and they didn't forget. Because rigging in MotoGP isn't about altering the result. It's about designing the conditions so the outcome was never in doubt. You can see it in how penalties are handed out. Not based on impact, but identity. In 2023, Marc Marquez collided with Miguel Oliveira, breaking bones, ending race weekends. Marquez, given a double long lap penalty, but the penalty wasn't served. Why? Because Honda and the stewards debated which race it should apply to, until the issue just disappeared. No one even remembers what the final ruling was. Meanwhile, Fabio Quartararo tapped a rider in turn 1. No crash, no injury, barely even paint contact. Grid penalty, applied, no questions, no delay. MotoGP's excuse? We are consistent, but they're not, and riders know it. That's why they've stopped protesting. Because when a system smiles at Ducati and punishes Yamaha or Aprilia for the same action, it's not a rule book, it's a playbook. But the manipulation goes deeper than penalties. It's in the team structures. Ducati doesn't run a team. They run a fleet. 8 riders, 4 liveries. One target, protect the red. And every single Ducati satellite rider knows the dance. They'll race hard, they'll battle, but when the factory man needs space, they move. You'll see it at turn 5 in Sepang. You'll see it in the final laps of Aragon, when Bastianini rides like he's chasing, but never closes the final 10th. You'll see it in the way Zarco or Martin struggle with grip, only when Bagnaia is behind them. There are no team orders. There are just aligned interests. And in MotoGP, alignment is everything. If the entire grid is playing for themselves, titles are chaotic. But if 7 riders are holding position so one can thrive, the outcome isn't just probable, it's engineered. And even if that one rider falters, crashes, struggles, panics, the system cushions it because the cameras will cut away, the media will spin it, and the next race, the story will continue uninterrupted. Because MotoGP isn't just a sport, it's a scripted product. And that product needs consistency. It needs golden boys. It needs headlines that sell in Italy, Spain, France, and Southeast Asia. And sometimes those headlines are worth more than a fair race. That's why you see things like technical favoritesome creep in quietly. Ducati's scoop device, once called illegal by rivals, was allowed after one meeting. MotoGP said it cools the tire. Even though telemetry showed aerodynamic advantage, Aprilia tries similar changes, gets blocked. KTM requests wildcard testing for young riders, denied. Unfair advantage. Ducati fields 8 bikes with synchronized data sharing? No problem. Same moves, different jerseys, different verdicts. And the scariest part? It doesn't feel like cheating, it feels normal. That's how deep the conditioning goes. Because fans now expect Ducati to get better launches, to get better tire life, to win every speed trap, to have one more click of mechanical edge. And when they do, no one asks why. They just nod. That's the culture rigging creates. One where advantage is masked as merit, and where the rider who was never meant to win never gets the chance to try. MotoGP's greatest manipulation isn't a fixed race. It's a fixed environment, where stories are preserved, chaos is minimized, and unpredictability is punished. Look at Joan Mir, 2020 world champion, won in a season full of injury, pressure, and broken calendars. No celebration, no support, no push from Dorna. They treated it like a placeholder season. Look at how quickly he disappeared. One bad year with Suzuki, and the narrative buried him. Even when he joined Honda, the media focus was on Marquez's arm, not Mir's title. And why? Because his win wasn't in the script. It couldn't be monetized. And then, Pedro Acosta rises. Young, Spanish, marketable. Suddenly, MotoGP opens every door. Wildcard tests. VR46 praise. Dorna posts on socials every week with his training clips.
Acosta may become a legend, but the red carpet is already rolled out. That's the new rigging. You're not stopping a champion. You're just ignoring anyone who doesn't fit the mold. And that's the final truth. MotoGP doesn't need to rig races. It rigs the landscape. It shapes the story before the lights go out. It chooses the music, the camera angles, the interviews, and the podium order long before rubber touches tarmac. And if your hero doesn't fit the blueprint, you'll only see them when they crash.